Good morning.
Good morning.
Guten Morgen.
That that was unexpected. Guten Morgen.
I don't know like any other German really. I know some Einklang Night music. Nacht
Ooh,
music.
Nacht.
Einklang Nacht music.
What Nacht is night, right?
Yes.
But what else we got? Ein is one?
A little bit of night music is what it is.
Oh, okay.
That's over 100 years old, right? That's got to be copyright free.
I would assume so.
Okay.
Who knows? They keep messing with copyright. At one point, you were only supposed to have it for X amount of time, and then they go, "Well, we'd lose a whole lot of money if we don't get this fired up again."
Right. Oh, let's see here. We'll just play a little bit. This is Einklang Nacht music.
I mean, when we're talking German music, I'm more into Kraftwerk.
Oh. Can you hear it? This is where I learned. Oh, the electric guitar, huh? You think that one was?
That's what that was, right? That was all just Jimi Hendrix on
Yeah.
electric guitar.
Exactly. No, so Einklang Night music, a little bit of night music is one of my songs I learned when I was playing piano growing up. Did you ever play any instruments?
Oh, I tried to play guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did the girls run away when you were naked with the acoustic guitar behind? They're like, nope.
Yeah, I kept pulling the guitar up a little too high.
Yeah.
It wasn't attractive.
Or you like set up in the girl's house and then all of a sudden the mom shows up instead. And you're like, oh, this is awkward.
yeah.
But
It was actually her dad. With the grandma. They walked in on me and I had the whipped cream on my nipples and everything.
and grandma starts walking forward and dad's like, whoa. Not again. First the saxophone, now this.
Right.
Why?
Right. Yeah. And then there's like the harmonica. What are you hiding with that?
Hey, there you go. Oh man, that would really blow. So Einklang Nacht music. Other than that, I sprechen Sie Deutsch. Let's see, what else do I know? What's it called? Einfach genial das Kartenspiel, which is a card game I know. The game's called Einfach genial. It's like ingenious. And das Kartenspiel is the card game. So,
makes sense.
I know a little bit of German. Prost, which means
yes.
cheers,
Yeah. When I was over there, I was there for about a month and picked up almost nothing. But
pretzels and beer, right?
Yeah, I picked up some weight.
Okay, good.
But I would go to this gas station every morning because it was like on the way to from where I was staying up to the academy where I was learning color theory. And so while I was there, then I'd walk through this, and this is a little town called Trier. And as I would kind of walk, then there's a gas station I'd stop in and I'd try to get some breakfast. And back then I was trying to be super healthy, and I would, I'd order like one.
Hold on,
egg.
just to be clear, you were trying to be super healthy, but you also picked up weight.
Yeah, I was
right,
trying to
just
be
making sure.
super healthy in the mornings because I was drinking so much in the evenings.
Balance,
Yeah,
balance.
It's moderation.
So you
in
picked
all
up
things.
a little weight instead of a lot of weight.
lot
so
of
that's a
weight,
win,
yeah.
honestly.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, she would basically every morning she'd teach me how to say like what I was ordering, and it was like ein Ei, and that's like one egg. And so this is like the extent of my German is being coached by a lady at a gas station. And then one morning she handed me this little thing, and I was like, what's this? And she was like, feeling. And I was like, feeling? She's like, just drink it. Just drink it. It's good for you. I drank it, and it was like licorice vodka or something, and it was like 7 a.m. and I'm over there sputtering and choking, and
Is she cracking up?
every German guy in there is laughing their ass off at me.
She set you
Yeah,
up.
she set me up, man. Everyone
Yeah.
loved it. It was
I mean, did
comedic.
you love it too?
Well, after I got it out of my nose,
Yeah.
licorice vodka in your nose is not great. I will say that.
There's something similar, although probably not as tasty and probably not quite as refined. Malort. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
It's this
It
liquor.
sounds awful.
Yeah, it is awful.
Like
It's this
something out of
liquor
Harry
in
Potter.
Chicago area. I just remember I was listening to the radio one day here in Dallas area, and or maybe it was in LA, and they would mentioned it, and of course it was like, oh, did you try the Malort? And it's like, you gotta try it. Or maybe they even had a bottle or whatever, and it's just like that kind of thing. It's like, oh, disgusting, but you gotta try it. And so we tried it when we went in Chicago, and I don't think it was as disgusting as they made it out to be. Classic, because entertainment and whatnot. Although it is a polarizing thing, right? But I don't know, that popped in my head too. So anyone who's out in Chicago, go get a little 7 a.m. Malort.
Yeah, it's a
Get
great
you
way to
going.
wake you up in the morning.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know why I'm probably just thinking of random good morning things to say. That's where the German came from. But yesterday I was listening to this podcast, Freakonomics. You ever listen to Freakonomics?
Oh yeah, and years ago I read the books, but I guess there's 2 books on it. But then on occasion I'll still listen to the podcast.
Yeah. So it's a pretty. I like it a lot. Actually, I mean, I knew I liked it, but then whenever I saw, I was like, all right, I'm gonna move on to the next thing, and then at the very end, at the outro, he'd plug the next one, and I'm like, dang it, that sounds good too.
Now I have to listen to that.
Yes, now I have to listen to all of them. But the one I listened to, or one of the ones I listened to, I should say, was how much does discrimination hurt the economy? It was interesting because, World War I and the Nazi movement, World War II and the Nazi movement, all of that obviously is a horrible thing, but it made for great economic studies because it was 1933-ish when, Nazi rule started to come, and it wasn't until like 1938, 39, somewhere in there, where World War I started happening in earnest.
World War II.
Sorry, I keep throwing that around.
Yeah, going back in time. Yeah, but they are sort of interestingly linked at some point. Like, I'm not a World War I, World War II buff. I figure that I'm going to wait till I hit 60 to turn into the old man that only talks about war.
I like it.
Like, or it's like, why do all old men go into like either the Civil War or World War II? They just become like super buffs about it. But anyway, no, I think you got the timing about right, like 38 or so when it really started ramping up.
Yeah, but the point is that it it was like, oh, well, they looked at how these companies did, because what happened was Jews were at first just kind of like frowned upon, and then started to become, out of taste or whatever, and then after a while it was like, all right, get them out, and then of course it then elevated to them dying, which is the worst part, of course. But it was talking about how, first of all, a really interesting fact is that Jews have an outsized impact in the areas that they were, at least in Germany. And it was like, although they represented, I'm going to mess up all the numbers, by the way, although they represented only like 5% of the population, they paid 30% of the taxes.
Oh,
and
man.
And then they made up like, I don't know, 20% of the executive seats and things like that. Yeah. So it's like, even though they're the small percentage of the population, they were big contributors. And so the study that one of these economists did was looking at, well, what was the impact of that on all those companies? And they found that, hey, they all declined for at least 10 years. And they were able to separate all the variables to statistically significantly say, like, it was because of that, right?
Man. Yeah, that's impressive. It makes you wonder too about different cultures and I don't know. You wonder if it's like that with all races. You wonder if this is something that, is, because I always thought Judaism had a sort of I don't know, they have certain ways of thinking about things and doing things that are probably different than other people. And you wonder how that sort of impacts how they interact with the community, how they, the fact that they are on boards and seats and, they study certain ideas. And because I've always kind of thought that the studying part of Judaism was interesting, that we would spend so much time sort of studying and arguing and bantering about these kind of concepts, and that forming like this backbone of this kind of controversial education where you're once respectful and polite, but you're also thinking a lot about stuff.
Yeah, well, that was another thing they pointed out was that they had a lot of really cool facts. Jews, you guys are cool, man. I mean, this podcast convinced me. I knew before, like if there was a tagline for like a race, the struggle is real.
Yeah.
Thousands of years, hundreds of years, whatever the number is, like we've been at it. So it's
Yeah.
like, well, adversity breeds, I don't know, resilience and all these good things, right? But it was one of the things that the podcast was talking about was how they are disproportionately highly educated, and then also how, oh man, there was one other thing you'd mentioned that piqued my memory, but it might be gone now.
Well, there's something about the way they impact communities and they set up their own communities too.
Oh yes, sorry to interrupt. It was just about that culture of learning and pushing back and things like that. But yeah, sorry, they were setting up their own communities and
Oh yeah, I mean out in areas of Brooklyn or whatever, then there's Jewish communities and they sort of have their own ideas and their own thing and they do them, and that's sort of it is fascinating when we get into like discrimination because people are like they should assimilate,
right,
and I'm like maybe we're not so great to assimilate into. Like,
Yeah.
It's one of the things, like if they're doing awesome, I let them do awesome.
Yeah, it wasn't until lived out in Los Angeles, and there's an area in Hollywood that is, very Jewish, and being Saturday being the Sabbath, you see them walking around because they don't drive on that day, at least these particular denomination or whatnot. It could be Hasidic, I'm not sure, but the kind where they have the big hats and the curly hair and things like that. And so it was interesting because that was, I think, the first time I'd ever seen, besides on TV and movies. It was like, oh hey, there they are, because it's one of the things about people being a minority of a place is there's just not as many of them, right? Mm-hmm. The other fact that I remembered was talking about the number of Nobel Prizes they have. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's just like
they're going through.
They're like 1% or less than half of 1% of the world population, and like that. And again, messing up the numbers, but they have like 30% of the Nobel Prizes. It's just some crazy outsized impact.
Oh yeah. Like you start and then after World War II, one of the things was, I think it was Operation Paperclip, where we brought over a lot of their scientists to work on our rockets. So our entire our nuclear program and rockets and everything else, and getting to the space. All those things were usually by stealing Jewish intellectuals.
Yeah.
You're smuggling them out of the country they were in. And so it's fascinating to think that they sort of helped build sort of American dominance for a period of time.
Yeah. So the other thing, the greater point was they were studying, how having minorities in the workplace affects how diversity in the workplace works. And then later on they talked about, oh, well, what do you do? How do you fix it, right? And because it's like there's what this thing is, something like being forced versus being natural, and does that matter, and things like that. And then, if I'm running a company today, what are the steps I can do? Like, how do I make that stuff happen? So it was a really interesting podcast, which we'll post in the chat. But yeah, so yesterday, what did we talk about yesterday, Ryder?
Oh, we talked about Thanksgiving and traditions, and we went off for an outsized period of time about sort of television and its impacts, especially when you're in groups. Maybe instead of playing games, a lot of people will just hang out and watch television, and we're debating whether or not that was actually sort of beneficial. And I think we're both kind of coming down on the side that, okay, it's fine, but there might be better ways if you're actually going to engage with people. And television it's one form of entertainment, it's one form of passive media that we're participating in a lot, and maybe sort of turning that off, or at least limiting the scope of it, could be good.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me with television, Netflix, any of these types of things is just for you, kind of like with pretty much everything in life, just take a second and think about it and objectively say, hey, what do I want to do? What do I think is good? And have that intentionality aspect. And then it's up to you to decide, right? Like if you want to, stream all day, every day, and that's what you decide is best for you, that's up to you to decide, right? I'm not here to judge, right? I personally, for me, I've decided to do a little less than that, but I don't think that necessarily is anything we talk about here is a one size fits all, right? Everyone's got different situations.
Yeah, it's different situations indeed. I think that what we're interested in is just bringing up things that people don't think about.
Right.
Like, I think television has crept into our lives and taken a larger and larger role without us really paying that much attention to it or pushing back against it. So occasionally we're just kind of like, I don't know, push back against that, see what happens.
Yeah, I think a general trend is the less friction you feel to do something, the less you think about it as you're doing it. And TV and media consumption is something that has, over the last 50 years, gotten less and less and less and less friction. It used to be you had to get up and turn a knob, and guess what? They cut it off after a certain time. It's like
midnight or 2.
No
TV
like the
left. American flag would fly, and you're just like, we're out of TV for the day. You need to go to bed,
right? And so there used to be those things built in, right? And then capitalism got involved, which is both good and bad, right? And everything got taken to extremes.
Yeah, because now we have so many amazing choices, and it's on all the time. And this is the thing that we get stuck in. We have so many options, and it's so sort of oddly luxurious today. Like, even if you can't afford cable or Netflix or something else, hop on YouTube. Like, there is a lot of media at your disposal.
Yep. And so that led us to our challenge yesterday, which was the first challenge, as far as I'm aware of at least, that we doubled down on. Is one that we had from an earlier episode, but I think it's very important, and that is to turn off your autoplay. And we'll include links to that so you can, we talked about in a previous show, and I think we gave some instructions on how to do that with Netflix specifically. But you can also just search it online and find it. Hey, how do I turn off my autoplay on Netflix, on Hulu, on Paramount? On the downside is you have to do it on 25 different things now.
I know that's.
But yeah, give yourself that choice back. Take that, and the big thing is a big thing I like to teach as a whole is think about things up front, plan about them up front, be intentional about them up front. So future you will do the right thing or do what you think is right, or at least, have that second to think about it, right? I always like to be looking out for future Reed. There's times where I'll be walking around and I'll see like a tall like glass like resting precariously on 3-4 different things, and I'm like, nah, future Reed's probably going to bump that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that is funny. It's just like, if I don't hit that now, everything will be fine. No. You got to think about your clumsy self in the future.
Right.
It's like we get more clumsy throughout the day.
Yeah. Well, and it also, like, using that kind of example, it's like, then you set up other people to do it too, right? And then then you get mad at them and they feel bad and all these kinds of things. Like, for example, like, okay, if I leave my black iPad on a black chair and someone sits on it, that's my fault. That's my fault.
Yeah. No, this is a good way to think about it, right? Is it just like every decision you make, there might be ramifications for it.
Yeah.
And there's also there's places where certain things go, right? If you actually put your iPad in the same place every time, you know where to find it in the future. It's all these kind of little things that are it takes a little more effort up front and in the moment, but sometimes just being aware of them as you do them, that's all you really need. But
and it's habits, right? So you build them, you're not going to fix everything at once, right? Please don't try and fix everything at once. No. We're going to talk a little bit today about what happens when you kind of do that type of thing.
Do that, yeah. And then, there's this story, the classic story of Odysseus, right? That one of the things that happens is when you have to know that your future self will have different desires and different thoughts than your current self. So when you think about Odysseus, he's traveling around and he wants to sail past the sirens, and they sing and they drive people mad and all this kind of stuff. And of course he's like an egomaniac, right? He's like, well, I've got to hear them and survive just so I can brag about it, right? But he still does the thing where he has everyone on the boat has to stuff their ears with wax, and then they tie him to the mast, and he gets to hear them, and he gets to hear the sirens and survive because he knew that his future self would not be strong enough. Right? There is a weakness when you approach temptation.
Yes.
And so that's one thing it's kind of funny. I mean, not that a glass resting in a precarious place is temptation necessarily, but you're just there's too much chance involved. You're risking something that doesn't need to be risked.
Yes, for sure. And another a phrase that I find myself saying a lot is, an alcoholic is not going to walk down the street with all the bars. Like they have that forethought. Maybe if they've been around the block for a while and their urges are low and whatnot, they'll gradually reintroduce that type of thing. But if you get sober, the next day, the best thing is don't put yourself in situations where you're going to be tempted, right? This is a big thing, this whole idea of willpower. And people think that they have this willpower, but it's not as strong as people might think. I think we're probably going to talk about this a little bit more later today. So that'll be one of our topics today, is kind of talking a little bit about willpower and a little bit about, I guess, how would you summarize a couple of the things we're going to talk about?
Oh, yeah. We can talk about, willpower is a wonderful thing. It usually involves like ideas of discipline and goal setting, and then just like somehow gritting and holding puckering up and doing the right thing. And research has been showing that it's really not all that great. Like that is a fleeting diminishing resource that you can draw on to control your behavior. So it's kind of fun to think about it in terms of like a battery charge. So let's talk about that in a little bit, and then we might also move off into some other things, which is, what happens whenever you become, super willful? Like, what does that look like?
I know a guy named Will.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and he actually emailed me yesterday. So we'll hear more about that later.
Yeah.
Helpful for life. Welcome to What the Hell is Water. I'm Reed Garcia.
This is Ryder Richards.
I kind of missed the part where we like set our titles underneath. So let's do that again.
Yeah. Hey. Who?
Oh wait.
There. That was. Oh, that's me.
Double S. Go away. Double S.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well.
You wouldn't want them to miss you, Reed.
You would. There you are. Sorry for those
technical difficulties for those who are listening on audio only.
Oh, turned off the wrong writer. Don't you hate when that happens?
When I get turned off?
Yep. All right, let's try that again. Here we go. Welcome to What the Hell is Water. I'm Reed Garcia, founder of Helpful for Life.
This is Ryder Richards, random dude on the couch.
Random dude on the couch. All right.
Just dragging up nuggets of wisdom.
Can that please be like your LinkedIn bio, like your Twitter bio?
Yeah. Nugget of wisdom finder, like.
No, I like the full thing. Would you say dredging up?
Yeah.
Dredging up nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah, gold panning.
You know what that makes me think of?
What?
There's a lot of kinds of wisdom out there. You got barbecue wisdom,
shrimp wisdom,
coconut,
fried,
blackened wisdom. It's a little harder with the two syllables. It keeps throwing me off.
Yeah.
But, it's still pretty good. Danielle, in the chat, she says, tempting fate. That's another way to look at it. It's like, be a fortune teller. Look into the future and decide, what would future Danielle do? I'm going to have to move that now.
Yes, yeah.
Especially if you see, like, did you ever see any of the, is it Final Destination, where they have all the odd events that
that was a kind of the fun sequence.
It's like Goldberg Machine meets like horror movie.
Yes,
it's like, oh no, the candle wax dripped onto the wire, which led to this thing, and then it rolled into that thing, and then now the knife flew out of the block and then stabbed the person and they died.
Right. Yeah, it was always someone getting electrocuted or a ceiling fan dropping because of a series of events. And I remember liking the cinematography, the way they followed the little interactions around. That was fun.
Yeah. If you're a hyper anxious person, probably not the best thing for you to watch.
No.
But it's an entertaining thing nonetheless. All right, so yesterday Danielle and I went to a movie together. It had been the first time to go to the silver screen in a minute.
Silver screen.
Silver screen. It sounds so fancy. It's a
Did
little
y'all
fancier.
Go to a fancy one?
Oh no, definitely not.
Oh, no.
We went to the local, close by one.
Do too. The one that's like $3.50 for a matinee.
Yeah, and we went, and it was us and like one other group of people in the whole theater. So it's kind of cool. I was like, man, I wish you guys weren't here. Maybe during this Disney movie, Danielle and I get a little freaky deaky.
During a Disney movie.
Yep.
Perfect.
When in Rome.
Oh, is that what happens?
That's not what that means.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we saw the movie Encanto. which you
Okay.
actually spelled wrong, so I won't call you out on it. But
I was thinking incantation.
well,
I
it's
don't
actually in Spanish, encanto, with an E.
Encanto.
Yeah, encanto.
Oh.
Yeah, see, I know a little more Spanish than German, fortunately.
Well, you get the face going with it.
Yeah,
Say it one more time.
encanto.
Encanto.
But yeah, I'll avoid spoilers. But the kind of the premise of the movie is there's this magical family in Colombia, and it was cool because it was 97% English, but then they mixed in some Spanish as well, including in the songs. And so it's cool. So one of the things I liked is it's cool to see Disney doing some of these. Not always being just the white princess in the castle anymore, right? Especially over the last 10 years. But the premise of it was this magical family, and people end up with powers, and some people are not feeling they're feeling the burden of the responsibility of their powers, and I can't do enough. I'm trying to do more, and I'm trying to be what I need to be for me and for the family and for the world. But I can't, and I'm falling short. And on top of that, I had to keep it all inside. So there's that, and it was kind of funny that I had happened to watch that because I really had no idea what the movie is about. Someone just said go watch it, and they said I'm not gonna tell you anything because I don't want to ruin it. I was like, oh, cool. All right, so I went and saw it. And then earlier that day, I'd listened into your podcast. I was like, oh, little writer, another dreamy thing. So then when Danielle and I were in the dark room listening to your podcast together.
Getting freaky.
Yeah, getting freaky, as one does. No, we were listening to your podcast, and your last episode, I believe your most recent one, is called The Hero Trendency.
Yeah.
And I'll let you give the kind of the elevator pitch about it, but it was... I had the similarities. I was like, man, similarities between a Disney movie and writer? Who would have thunk? It's magical.
It is. That's what Disneyland's all about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this was kind of I've been interested in self-optimization for a while, and I'm sort of interested more because of the way I am in sort of the pitfalls and the things people don't talk about with it. And so I'm kind of this hero tendency is, I guess, the trend and tendency to want to sort of become heroic, right? We have all these heroes in our movies. We have all these kind of superpowered people. And then I even sort of bring up in the podcast, like, what happens when you're trained as an assassin? What happens when people are sort of manipulated and you take them as a blank slate and you train them as something? And give some examples of how that works out. And then I kind of get into the sort of mistakes of the superficiality of the superhero, right? That a lot of people want to look like the superhero, but maybe they get caught up in vanity and they never really do the internal overcoming and resilience that's emotionally necessary to be a real human, right? They just look the part. And so I kind of get into that. And then at the very end of the podcast, I sort of jump into Nietzsche's conception of the Übermensch, which is the overman, beyond man, or the superman. And that's really kind of where some of these ideas came from, is that there could be somebody who was above and beyond. But of course, in philosophy, it isn't the superhero warrior. It is actually the person who can deal with dueling binaries and overcome them. So that would be subject object, that could be mind body, that could be differing values. But any kind of opposites that cause tension, there might be a way to transcend or overcome those. And you don't see a lot of our superheroes doing that. They mostly just punch their way through things.
Yeah. Well, I will say that, again, another one of the trends within recent years that I think is out there. I don't watch enough to know, but I've heard is that the comic book movies and the comic books. I think the comic books have been doing it for a while, but comic book movies now have been showing a little bit more of that struggle and the character arc, and not only just the action. At least that's what I'm told.
Yeah, no, that's all true. Like, they have started making them more human and having sort of a pathos, right? There's all of a sudden they have all these sort of psychological issues you're fighting through, and because of the enhanced powers, they have enhanced responsibilities, and this creates enhanced burdens that they all have to deal with. Because at some point, if your ability is that you can save the world, then are you then responsible for the entire world?
Yeah. And especially in the case of a lot of these superheroes, if you will, it's like, and I didn't choose this. I was just born with this, or I was bit by
spider
this
bit me.
radioactive spider, or whatever, or
Right,
I was
right.
a government, experiment. And now it's like, there's this obligation, right? So it's interesting how much psychology gets into that. I would agree. It would be interesting to see a series. And if you guys out there have a series or a show that you think that really does dive well into this, whether it's a strict comic or if maybe it's anime or something like that, please share it. That'd be interesting to see one that really dives into all of the psychological and things like that. But real quick, I wanted to back up to the philosophy stuff so we can unpack a little bit of that. So first off, you mentioned Nietzsche, which is a philosopher who,
German philosopher.
Wow. What
Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Wait, that sounded Italian.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Friedrich. Nietzsche.
Yeah.
You just got to say it more angrily.
Yeah.
Nietzsche.
Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's actually a really fascinating character. He's controversial. A lot of people don't like him. I saw a post online when I was doing some research on him, and it was like, should we cancel Nietzsche? And it was like, of course someone wants to cancel him,
right?
Because he also sort of preached hardship as a way to move past things and build resiliency. And
Jews. I mean,
yes.
tied together here.
Yeah, and
we couldn't have set this up any better.
And that's the other funny thing about it's not funny. It's actually quite tragic and sad. Is that his sort of idea of the Übermensch was co-opted by the Third Reich as this sort of conception of the Superman and the master race. And
so let's back up for 1 second. So first, there's Nietzsche, who is this philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
What's his 30-second pitch? What's he known for? If that's even possible, is it just so much?
He has this kind of one of the easiest ways to kind of get into him, at least for me, was "Thus Spoke Zarathustra," which is this kind of parable, and it's this kind of overarching set of ideas about what happens with sort of knowledge and knowledge conveyance and coming to. So there's this idea. His maybe most famous phrase is "God is dead." So he was one of the first guys to sort of proclaim that, and so in that way, then. That seems very anti-religious, right? Just in the same way when you start talking about the Übermensch or the Superman, then you think that maybe he's all about power. But he's really not about those things, and that's what kind of makes it disturbing, is because he's kind of known as the philosopher who philosophizes with a hammer. He comes around and he's strong and he sort of hits things and he makes declarations, and they all seem really bold, and like every 21-year-old guy at some point goes through a Nietzsche phase, kind of like if you're in the philosophy circles, because it's all powerful and strong, and it feels like there's conviction behind it. And so he's kind of an easy one to get into for all that. It's also easy to misinterpret. It's just like any kind of like lengthy text or whatever, there are fragments and segments of it you can cherry pick out. And that's kind of what happened to his Übermensch concept, or the Superman concept, was it kind of got cherry picked by the Third Reich because of his sister actually doling out pieces of it. Like the last 5 years of his life, he was basically crazy. And so during that crazy time period, then he was feverishly writing things, and his sister was just like hand picking things and then doling them out to the wrong people. So it ended up sort of corrupting a lot of his philosophy. But the philosophy is really sort of about circles and cycles and moving through things. He has this idea of the the camel, lion, child. And it's the idea of like storing up assets and then sort of, becoming powerful and then reverting back into a child that has open-eyed wonder again. And these kind of small cycles you can run through over and over again. So he has these really wonderful kind of parable ideas. He sort of packages things up so they're there for easy consumption, but then they get distorted, which is, by the way, exactly what his philosophy is about. It's how the masses distort knowledge.
Interesting. Yeah, it sounds kind of, I don't know, meta in a way.
yeah, it really is.
There was one thing you said in your podcast about him that was interesting, was as his sister, essentially, I guess, co-opted some of his work and ended up getting used in these bad ways, which again, I'm sure for you is interesting because you like to examine cancel culture. It was like, that's cancel culture right there. It's like, okay, and I think a big thing with cancel culture is, one thing I would be curious to know the percentages But a lot of times cancel culture happens when something is taken out of context, right? And in this case, they took one piece of his teaching without all of the things around it and then applied it in a nefarious way. So it's like you take the thing by itself, which is dangerous in and of itself, but then you go and apply it in arguably literally the worst possible way. And then now, guess what? Now Nietzsche is essentially, in a lot of circles, been frowned upon and canceled because in effect, he helped that happen, but yet he also moved along philosophy and this way of thought and helped progress and I'm sure inspire a lot of future thinkers as well. So again, anything that's good can be taken out of context and turned really bad.
Yeah, and one of the things you might learn as well from a lot of his philosophy is he does have a lot of issues with the masses and with mass culture. And a lot of it is people not thinking for themselves, not working through problems, not trying to overcome things on their own. There is a tendency to just sort of slide into sort of being into conformity, let's say, and just sort of existing in the herd, in the middle of the pack, doing whatever you want to do there, but really not challenging anything or taking on anything new. And so he's very sort of disdainful of this, which if you're part of a cancel culture, which is a public movement, then
again,
it's
the
very
irony.
easy, to just embrace the public movement of canceling things because as a herd, you can just run around canceling whatever you want, and so there becomes this kind of group dynamic to it that Nietzsche would be frightened of and terrified of, and says we should all be terrified of participating in that.
Yeah, I can just see his headstone, and it either says like QED or I told you so.
Yeah,
You're like, right. I am the perfect example of what I said.
Yes, yeah.
But the quote that you said, which was kind of powerful, which helped definitively say like he was not supportive of the Third Reich or them using their ideas, much less for bad, was that he said that all anti-Semites, which is people who are against Jews, he would take them all out and shoot them.
Yeah, they should all be shot.
And in that case, it actually included his sister, which was like, wow, that gets serious real fast.
Yeah, that's when we talk about cherry picking and people not pulling from that direct phrase, right? But going ahead and jumping over that phrase into something else.
Right.
Like, and it gets really messy. And but one of the things that when I was younger, then Nietzsche was somebody that I read, and I kind of picked pieces of what he said, and I kind of.
So you read German, huh? That's impressive.
Yeah, right. As if that ever happened. No, but yeah, I read a little bit of like some let's say synopsis or Cliff Notes versions of him, and I always kind of liked him, and he seemed powerful, and it seemed awesome. Like it seemed like a philosophy you could get into as a young man, and all this kind of stuff. And then later I frowned on him and sort of poo-pooed the whole idea. And then have listened to a couple of podcasts, one of them being, The Partially Examined Life. And over time, I've seen like guys like Wes Alwyn, who's one of the hosts on there, actually sort of change his mind. He didn't like Nietzsche, and then the more he read of him, he's like, oh my goodness, this is really quite profound. And I just kind of missed it on the first time. And so it's interesting to sort of see if you give some of these people another read in a different light or a different context, they might have kind of deep, amazing things to say. It's just that they're so shaped by current culture.
Well, it sounds like the perfect kind of case of where if you were to read just the Cliff Notes, if you will, of their studies, then depending on who wrote those Cliff Notes, you might miss out on the real message, right?
Yeah, and it's one of the tendencies that we have now, right? Is this easy grasp for power, this easy grasp for knowledge, without really having sort of the sort of difficult hardship of gaining true wisdom, which might come from actually learning German and reading full Nietzsche. And then like, what would that do to you as a person? That would have to like change you. You'd have to go through a lot of hardship, and then whatever you learned from that, you'd probably glean in a different way because you'd put in all this extra work and effort. But instead, we can just go for the 30-second soundbite.
Yeah, and I can't help but think about the Rome Book Club, that we did. The first book we did was called How to Read a Book, and one of the things it talks about is, first off, not every book is worth your full intention, focus, and analysis. But for the ones that are, it gives a very thorough way of doing it and getting to the skeleton of the ideas and, taking out the things and also talking about the value of reading them for yourself versus relying on somebody else. And I couldn't help but think of there are these services now where it's like any nonfiction book in 15-minute like read. And it's like, okay, there's definitely some books where that literally will extract what you need, but there's nothing that replaces like the time and the space and as you're reading the thing too. Yeah. Because a lot of times with a lot of the concepts, especially in the nonfiction world, but even in the fiction world, these stories, these situations, these things, like by getting yourself put into that situation and kind of feeling a little bit of what the person feels and thinking a little bit what the person might think and maybe even coming to some conclusions on your own, that's where the true value comes. It's not in saying like, oh yeah, the book about the golden rule. Yeah, I know it. Treat others how you want to be treated. Duh. It's like, there you go. That's the whole thing.
Right. Because at that point you can just parrot a phrase, right?
Right.
Which is much different than sort of taking that phrase into yourself and really sort of examining it thoroughly and changing your life around it.
And hearing the examples and thinking about those examples in your life and the lives around you. And guess what? Every time you're doing all those things, you're also creating other mental connections and other things that these ideas are being anchored to. It's more like you're creating that web instead of just being that one line of connection. So that one line of connection is not going to be as strong. It's not going to be as robust, and it's going to be easily forgotten, and you're not going to be able to apply it as well as if you're building that web of connections yourself.
Yeah, there's something, you would have to think too, like if you want to sort of go with the single thing versus the sort of webs of connections, you would think the web, the more connections you have with sort of a behavior or anything else, is you would assume the stronger it is. And this could go with negative behaviors or positive behaviors. But, the more connections you have that sort of are stimulated, then sort of I would assume the stronger than you are, the more robust, the more resilient you are for different things. And so that might kind of take us back a little bit into this idea of willpower and what that looks like, right? Because you want to assume that you're the kind of person who does certain things. And when temptation shows up, you would want some sort of robust network, some sort of robust set of things to help prevent you from falling into temptation. And this is kind of interesting too, that I just finished a book that was by Daniel Kahneman, an Israeli guy who won the Nobel Prize.
Nice.
Right. So there we go. We're back at that. But he won the Nobel Prize in economics, but he mostly does like behavioral studies. And so I think he's termed a psychologist. But one of the things that he does is he sort of shows that people don't know who they are. And from hour to hour, even within a few hours, you can ask basically the same scenario and people will give you a different answer. So they don't even know their own mind, except for when they recognize the problem. When they see that you have reworded the same problem in a different way, they will try to give the same answer they gave last time because they want to be logically consistent with themselves. But if they don't recognize a problem, they're almost never logically consistent. They always make a different decision. And yet we think we're the same person who would make the same decision no matter what, given any context. Even in the same context.
Say that one more time, though. We
think we're the same person all the time. We think there is a logical consistency to us, that we are anchored, we are a singular individual, yet even a couple hours later, we are making decisions that we wouldn't recognize from us just a few hours previous.
Yeah,
I think that's when you stretch it out over a year.
I think that's really important, because I think that's one of the biggest shifts I've made in my life, is when I've recognized, oh, hey, you don't have as much agency, as control, as much free will, if you will, as you think you do, right? And that doesn't necessarily, you could argue whether or not it has to do with religious things or not, which, by the way, if, a couple of the religious things we've mentioned have piqued your interest, last Tuesday, we talked a little bit about religion, and we talked about, I'll leave it at that. You guys should go check it out. It's been an interesting episode. We've had many people ask us about it. Help me get back on track here.
Yeah, no, so we're talking a little bit about willpower, and then the idea that you aren't the same person all the time.
So yes, you aren't the same person, and you don't have as much agency or control as you think of. And that's not meant to be like discouraging, like you're dumb or you're stupid or you can't control it. It's like, no, just recognize that's just a fact of life. Like, doesn't matter if you're a Nobel laureate or if you're just a dude who, says 5 words a day. Like, it doesn't matter that where you are on the spectrum of anything. It's like, you are an animal, you are a human, you're going to respond certain ways to certain things, and also you may not respond the same way to the same type of question because of a lot of different factors. And one thing that came to mind was a study where they analyzed judges and they said, how did their decisions change throughout the day? And they found that basically right after lunch or right before lunch, I don't remember the exact finding, but it's basically as they got tired and as they got hungry, their decisions skewed essentially worse.
Yeah. If you're going in for asylum or something, the time of day your case is called is more important to you than any other factors. So if you catch a judge in the morning when they're fresh, you're more likely to get asylum. If you catch them right before lunch, you're less likely to get it because they're tired and grumpy.
Meaning going to an insane asylum versus going to jail?
No, getting like a refugee status.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's so there's all these kind of things like that. There's all sorts of judgments that they have looked at these. It's even down to things like whether or not the weather is good outside. If it's a cloudy day, you're less likely to get leniency from the judge. And so these are even though you're inside a room and the judge isn't even looking around outside. So there are weird things like this that happen with humans, and this is all about the impossibility of humans knowing who they are and doing the same action repeatedly and being a consistent individual, which takes us all the way back again to the idea of willpower and who will you be in a couple hours? Who will you, like the guy that takes the glass off, right? Because we don't want to tempt fate because we know that future us is a different person. And just like Odysseus being tied to the mast again, like you have to plan for that future self who you don't know. That temptation is going to rise. Something is going to rise. You're going to be tired. You're going to be angry. You're going to make different decisions. So when we start talking about things like willpower, whose willpower are you using? What version of yourself is using this willpower? Like that is changing all the time. Like as a personality, you're a cloud of possibilities. But there's also a market that's going on inside of you all of the time for which decision is going to get predominance at any given point. So yes, you are an individual in a certain range, but that's a range of possibilities. So there might be some things you would never do, but there's a lot of variation within there.
Yeah. No, and it's a really interesting topic in my opinion, and another big realization is that willpower is not as big of a thing as you think it is. And one of the key things for me that helped me realize is stop beating yourself up. Stop saying if I really said I wanted to do this thing, then why can I not do this thing? You know what I mean? If I had $1 every time I heard that, I wouldn't be talking to you guys. I'd be sitting on a beach, putting my feet up,
Yeah, this is the other thing is people are like, well, I want this, or I desire this, or I deserve this. And you're like, if you waited 2 hours, a different you might show up.
Right.
That's also a fascinating idea.
Well, and connected to all of this is the ideas of, okay, well, if willpower is not really a thing, well, what do I do, right? And so that's where one of the big learnings that I've picked up over the last few years is it's not about your, one individual action. It's about what are you doing all the time, right? It's about habits and it's about routines. And if you look at these superstars who make billions and billions of dollars or millions of dollars, whether they're, a famous actor or someone running a business or whatever, a common trend you'll see among all of them is, not all of them, but a lot of them is habits and routines that they've established over time, right? And again, I want to emphasize, they didn't go from nothing at all to all of that overnight. It was, okay, first, let's take The Rock, for example. First thing he probably started was he started working out every day. Yeah. And then maybe he started doing, whatever to further his entertainment career. And then he started doing this and that. And now he probably wakes up and he films 5 movies, does 17
right.
commercials.
It's like Jocko Willink goes to the gym at 4:30 every day or something. And, they start their day out earlier and earlier and they're having to work out harder and harder. And then they set up, as they get more successful, then their time gets stretched and their priorities get stretched, but they have certain habits and routines that they stick with.
And the point is not, we should all try and be like that, right? But it's look at you and your life and say, okay, if I'm looking to make some kind of meaningful change, either in what I'm doing or who I am or what I'm trying to do, trying to accomplish, then what are the things that I can set up to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that will help me do those things, right? And, some of that first starts out with well, okay, well, what is it that I want to do in the first place? Which is one of the other things that you talk about in your podcast, which is, what is the why? What is the purpose that is driving people to do the things that they're doing?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in 1 second here. And then what you need to do is you take that thing that you want to do, or the person that you want to become, or whatever it is, and then you got to break it down into small actionable steps that you can do on that intermittent basis. And then you start doing it once a day, once a week, whatever it may be. And then after you do that for a while, you start to establish that habit. Then you can put another habit on there that is called, habit stacking. And maybe that's at the same time, maybe it's at a different time. But the goal is a real easy trap to fall in. I say this because I myself have fallen into it many times. Danielle also has fallen into it many times. Is we know all of the things we need to do or we would like to do, but then we try and go do all 20 of them, right? And then guess what? We do none of them because we fail at all of them, and we're like, okay, that wasn't great. But then we kind of repeat the cycle, like, all right, this is the time, right? Another great example, which is coming up here in a couple months or a month, is New Year's resolution. It's like, all right, now's the time to set these positive intentions. But guess what? Why all those break off is because people focus very much on I'm going to lose 15 pounds, or I'm going to do X, I'm going to do Y. Instead, it's like, you know what? Maybe something better is I'm going to go on a walk for 5 minutes every day. And that is not only more likely to happen, but is going to be more consistent and actually will lead to more lasting change than trying to say something, kind of just like, I'm going to lose 15 pounds. And of course, there's a lot we can get into about goal setting and all that kind of stuff too. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Oh, no, I'm totally on board with all. I think that there is something about, and this is, I think, a huge problem as well, is you get into this why. Like, well, why are you doing this? It's just randomly losing 15 pounds. Why? Because I feel like I should, because I want to look good. While on the other hand, maybe going out for a walk every day is actually about your mental health, but the byproduct is that you lose 15 pounds, right? Maybe there's things like that. There might be goals and things that you can drive for that have a deeper, more root cause for being like a more sort of actuated human, right? That isn't sort of based around vanity metrics, because I think we can talk about losing weight oftentimes is related to vanity and appearance and fitting in with society, and then we all get resentful that we have to do all this work to fit in with society, and these are problems that we kind of get into. And so even in the sort of podcast, it's one of the things that I try to talk about, or at least allude to quite often, is that, like, why are you doing this? Are you trying to, like, if you have all these habits and routines, like, do you become a machine at some point? Do you just become a pattern of routines and then that becomes your identity? Or did you have an identity first and the patterns and routines are helping you achieve your identity? So it's a chicken egg scenario there.
Right.
It's hard to figure out. Most of us don't know what our meaning or mission in life is anyway. And yet people keep saying, well, once you figure out your mission, then here are the steps to success. But most of us are just like, I just want enough money to be secure in my life. That's not really a mission. That's just survival. So our goal a lot of times is survival, and so it's not surprising that we're going to follow kind of, let's call them superficial paths that will get us to money and survival, and then we get to the end of that road and we're just like, okay, I've got money now what? Well, I'm kind of machinic and I don't know what I desire anymore, and I'm kind of a mess.
Yeah, amen. Amen to that. And one of the things that I wanted to point out, which is me personally, one of the as my mind has developed and shifted, especially over the last few years, especially as someone working towards this larger company, larger long-term goals, things like that, is that purpose is not something you just grab and find, and it's not something that is going to stay the same necessarily either, right? And again, this isn't applied to everybody, but I feel like that's a very common trap that people fall into, is looking for that purpose and that thing, and then feeling so like defeated and deflated and let down when they try that thing. And again, they're like, well, if this is my thing, then why can't I do it, right?
Yeah.
And it's tough because it's like, oh, I'm looking for the thing, I'm trying to do the right thing, but then I'm failing, and then I feel bad, which makes me not want to try, and there's just kind of this vicious cycle that prevents you from going forward. But the reality is, in my opinion, is that, and based off of a lot of things that I've heard and read over the last few years, is that you need to find, do a little bit of work, find something that you think might be kind of close, but accept that, hey, this isn't going to be it, but this is going to move me in that direction, right? And then, after you do that for a while, then you're going to learn a little bit. Like, oh, I like this. I don't like that. Maybe I should shift over here. And then you shift to the slightly different spot. Or maybe it's way different. Maybe it's completely different than you thought. But the idea is you kind of keep doing this throughout your life. And eventually you're going to either get closer to the thing that you are feeling strongly about, or maybe you find out that the thing you feel strongly about is literally just changing and doing a bunch of different things. But as you do the work, that's when you start to develop and feel more of what that purpose can be.
That's such a good point.
And I feel like a trap a lot of people fall into once is they do the one thing, and then let's just say it's like a job, right? And they don't feel fulfilled and they don't enjoy it or whatever. But again, they're just so focused on survival that they're like, well, I'll just do this. And then that's what they do. And then you look up 10, 20 years later and it's like, all right, so that's what you did, right? And again, I'm not trying to say there's anything wrong with that, right? My main point is I want you to think about it. I want you to say, am I okay with that?
Yeah.
Because very few people, I imagine, are sit down and say, hey, in 10 years, I'm going to be doing this deadbeat job that I don't enjoy. People don't say that, right?
No one says, like, you know what? I want to have a really long, boring life of doing nothing.
Right.
Almost no one has that on the agenda list.
But one day after another, one week after another, next thing you know, you look up, oh, guess what? Then there's a pandemic. Well, that erased a year, and so then you look up and it's like, wow, it's been 5 years and maybe I'm halfway down to this thing. And I'm not trying to tell everyone to go quit your jobs. And the job is even the thing that has to be your purpose, which is another big myth.
Point.
Your job does not have to be your purpose. And I want to make sure I'm very clear on one thing here. I think it is perfectly fine to have a job that you are not a fan of, if it is allowing you to do things elsewhere in your life that is what is filling up your cup. Now, I would hope and encourage you to say, hey, if I'm going to be spending the majority of my waking hours during the week doing something that hopefully it's not like tearing my eyes out bad. And maybe it's just like, that's kind of like a sunburn bad, I guess, It's like, okay, that's not great, but I can tolerate it because it allows me to do ABC, right?
Right. Yeah, this is the other thing about, Reed was talking about doing the work. Like, you don't often know what your passions are until you're participating in the world, until you're encountering challenges and you're having to like constantly shift and move. And he was talking about these plans. He's like, we can have a 10-year plan, but along the way we're shifting and moving, we're pivoting as we encounter different things. And that means that we might have this kind of goal. But at the same point, we have to sort of exist in a world of ambiguity. We're challenging things. We're trying things out. They're going to fail. Some of them might succeed. We take stock. We, just kind of hunker down and repackage this again, and we give it another effort. And to think that that's your life is this constant cycle of trying and failing and succeeding and then just kind of picking the path as you go. I mean, that's kind of an exciting life. But the problem is when you get super scared of something like failure, or you just want static routine, because you don't want any challenges anymore, you just want to do some work and have it done and you don't want to think anymore, well then, that's okay. But it's really not I would say a thriving life. And so one of the things that is kind of interesting is the more you kind of think and kick these things around and you participate in the world, the more challenges you're going to get hit with. You might think you have a path, but it's like the first contact with the enemy. Like, as soon as the world shows up, you're gonna get kicked around a little bit, and it's gonna make you have to like double down or think more about some of your goals and some of the ideas that you want to pursue. So I'm kind of a big fan of this idea of engaging with the world to figure out what works for you and what doesn't. Engaging with people, getting to, if you throw out something and it's a crazy idea and somebody gives you that like eyebrow half raised kind of look, then you go, okay, well, that didn't work, and you have to like change tact. So your opinions also have to get sort of validated by other people. And I think that's one of the great reasons to sort of be around other people. You don't have to take their opinions, but you do need to at least maybe have some challenges and pushback. So I'm just sort of rambling at this point.
No, this is good. This is good. The one thing that you touched on there, which reminded me of, I had two quotes from things I was listening to yesterday. One of them you just brought to my head from yours, which was talking about, let me find it real quick because it was a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, here's what it was. Listen to the insights of cultural explorers. That was something you said in your podcast. And the thought process with that is, you know, a lot of times, and this is another realization I've had over the last few years, is like, okay, it seems to be the trend that things like yoga and meditation and mindfulness, like, not only are those like on trend or whatever, like, and more and more people are doing them, but there are now psychological studies and science backing up that these things are good. But wait, people have been doing this for decades, if not hundreds of years. And in fact, I can picture back in the 70s, there was like a whole counterculture of people doing this thing. But it's like, but guess what? Because, you know, dealing with the masses, minority, all that kind of stuff. Well, those ideas kind of got pushed to the side. And it's like, well, guess what? Here we are 40 years later, or however long, 50 years later. And now it's like, actually, those guys were onto something, right?
It's reemerging.
Right.
Yeah.
And I that's just one example that popped in my head, but I've seen that kind of over and over, is like, hey, there's this one little thing, like, that's actually a really solid thing to be doing. And yeah, maybe not all of it, right? But maybe grab the things that are good and compile them. And that's one of my favorite things about traveling. That's one of my favorite things about learning more about other cultures. It's one of my favorite things about learning about other religions is like, okay, well, clearly some group of people think this is really important and valuable, and maybe they don't even have the science to back it up. But hey, for example, with Judaism, like the ritual of Shabbat, we talked about that on a previous episode, and how that's something that I think is a really great practice, and I would encourage people to take that in. And what that is, as a reminder, is there's some sort of weekly meeting, essentially with the family. And it also, and I'm going to butcher what the actual thing is, but the part that I took about it was, hey, have that weekly meeting where you can talk about things and let the pressure off every week, instead of letting things build up, you know, over time. And of course, Shabbat has other things, including ritual with eating food and religious aspect as well. But for me, I'm like, all right, that's the part that I'm going to grab and turn into my thing. The other quote that I thought of was from a podcast I was listening to about the guy who founded Coinbase, which is the online, it's a website marketplace where you can buy and sell and hold cryptocurrency. And one of his quote was talking about, I want to find this one too. So well,
it's always tough when you're under pressure. But
yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, the crypto world is kind of fascinating too, because of course it's pushing back against this kind of mainstream ideology, and it's now gaining traction in certain areas. And yeah, I'm super interested in how it's perpetuating, and you know, if you want to consider it almost like a new religion where they're having to proselytize these new ideas, and then they're getting followers and adherents on there. It's really quite kind of exciting to think about that we're in the midst of sort of watching this happen.
Yeah. Okay. So I found, sorry to not acknowledge that, but
go ahead.
I found the quote, which was moving from one setback to another with enthusiasm.
Oh,
and
right.
he was saying he realized, you know, early on in his journey, that's what, you know, entrepreneurship kind of was, because he was like, oh, we do all these things, we'd make all this progress. And another thing he said was, you never know if you're one step and one change away from great success or just abject failure. And I think, you know, I think businesses and entrepreneurship is a great parallel and a great analogy to life, because if you don't have that overarching purpose for your business, then every single decision you make is that much harder. So that's why I'd say, okay, here's my purpose. All right. And then I come to this decision. I don't have to think and really think and say, oh, should I do X or should I do Y? I think, okay, which one of these aligns more with what we're trying to do? By having that guidance, by having that framework, by having that core inside, it makes everything that much easier, which is especially important because we make tons and tons of decisions every freaking day. And so by having that guidance, it really helps you, know what to decide. And then the other thing is recognizing that there will be friction and there will be issues and there will be things that come up. And that all kind of goes back to expectations, which we've talked about a few weeks ago. But by managing your expectations and making sure that you're not, if you're always expecting success and you're always expecting good things, then you're inherently going to be let down, because just probabilistically, that's not how life works, right? Yeah. And that's another good thing about the startup world is people go in with the expectation and the culture of like, hey, there's a 50+% chance you're going to fail. And oh, by the way, we're still going to fund you when your next one goes, right? As long as you don't, you make some good decisions and things like that, right? Which is another thing I really encourage you guys is it's okay to fail. It's okay to mess up. And that's a big thing about mistakes is just making sure that you learn from them, right? And, a popular, I don't know, story, I guess, that I've heard is, there's this guy and he's working and he made some mistake and it ended up costing the company $100,000. Well, what do? Do you fire the guy and do you keep him? And the guy says, no, I keep the guy. I just paid $100,000 to train him.
Yeah, right. Yeah, instead of punishing them for the loss, you go, you better have learned something, and then next time you won't make this decision because you bring in somebody new. Guess what?
Right.
They might lose another $100,000.
It's last story, and then we'll go. This other podcast, which is not too dissimilar from ours. It's called No Dumb Questions. Yeah. It's about a guy who I always forget if it's Dustin or Destin. Dustin Sandlin, who is a rocket engineer, and now he's started a YouTube channel called Smarter Every Day years ago, and millions and millions of views, very successful. And then he's got a friend who's also has a YouTube channel called 10-Minute Bible Hour, and he used to be I'm going to mess up the term, but a preacher or I don't know which denomination he was. They all changed all the names. So he led a church. He led churches.
Director.
Yeah, circus director. He led churches for many years, and he comes from like the humanitarian side, and Dustin comes from like the science side, and so like they kind of combine and talk about all sorts of topics. But anyways, one of the guys was flying a drone the other day, and he was getting this really cool shot, and he was like slowly backing up, and he was walking backwards as he did it, and he stumbled over a rock and janked the controller, and he flew the drone into his face.
That's awful.
And he's okay, fortunately. But yeah, he got his face all cut up, and he was at a wedding. And the wedding hadn't started yet. And it was like, oh, man, that sucks. But he's like, you know what? I know I shouldn't have been doing that. And guess what? I'm never going to fly that drone into my face again. I'm going to learn from those mistakes.
Learn from it. Just one little anecdote to throw on top of some of this. When we're sort of talking about going through life and these constant challenges and learning, then Sam Harris had this little anecdote. He told a story about going to like a lunch with a friend, and he was just sitting there complaining about all these problems. And the friend goes, hang on a second, Sam, like, do you really want to wake up every day and not have a problem, not have a purpose in the world, not have something to solve? Like, the point of living is to go out and solve problems. It actually means that you're important and responsible and participating in the world when people come to you with problems. And so the idea that we then go, oh, there's all these problems to solve, that's actually a great thing. That's like, then you can take some real responsibility. You really have a stake in the world. And so, of course, there's going to be failures and there's going to be problems going on, and there's some of them are not going to work out. But the idea that you're participating in the world is to undertake problems and challenges and move on them.
And I can't emphasize enough how a lot of things we talk about on this show are really just subtle shifts, and a lot of them are mindset shifts and how you view something, how you see something. And again, a big common trend here is we're challenging you to think about how you're viewing something, how you're thinking about something, and analyze that, and then maybe change, maybe not, but maybe change, right? And this mindset shift I'm thinking of here is just how you view the things that are happening to you, how you view adversity. And one of the examples I think of too is like you're just walking around the house and you bump your knee, you bump your elbow, you're like, grumble, grumble, grumble. And I was talking with someone about this last week, and it's like, well, one, how you respond to that is going to vary based off of your state. And it's also going to vary based on your entire worldview, right? If you think the world is out to get you and bad things always happen to you, then that's your lens. That's what you're going to see through the world. And you're going to notice every single time somebody does something wrong to you, which in my mind is a tough spot to live in because it's much more negative based. And similarly, complaining about people and complaining in general, if you're a complainer, you are always focused on the negative. And so naturally you're going to see all of the negative in things versus having that shift in focusing on the positive, or focusing and recognizing like, hey, I bumped my knee, and this sounds cheesy as heck, but I bumped my knee, but at least I've got a knee, or at least I've got a job, or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, I bumped my knee, but Actually, I just worked for 8 hours where I didn't even actually do anything, but I just took home a couple grand or a couple $100 or whatever.
There's different ways to think. The other thing is just to laugh at yourself and just go, oops, I'm clumsy.
Yeah, and then maybe it's also,
attention.
hey, maybe I should think of future Reed and move that table.
Yeah, right. Maybe wear knee pads all the time.
I keep bumping that table every day. Huh.
Either I could move the table or build an obstacle course around it and you could just roll over the top of it in the future.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Yes, I like that. But really the answer is because Nietzsche told me so, I'm going to bump my knee every day and be grateful for it. Stronger through the pain.
Overcome it. Yeah.
So, all right, Ryder. So I posted a link to Ryder's podcast in the chat, and you can also look up any of your podcast players. It's called Let Us Think About It. The episode we're talking about is called The Hero Trendency. Not tendency, but it's got the word trend in there.
Oh, so funny.
Yeah, you're so trendy.
This is never going to do well on SEO searches. But anyway, whatever.
So I'm curious, do you have a challenge that pops to your mind from our discussion today?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, Reed, you were hitting on one earlier, which was really just kind of, we're talking about small shifts. And we're just talking about doing little small things and just changing the way you think about something just a little bit. Sometimes just being slightly aware of something. So, I think sometimes there's little things like just when you walk through a door, that's a transition in your life and you can just be aware of that moment. So when you're doing something and like you bump your knee, you hurt something, like when you find yourself complaining, I think that's the biggest one. I've heard of this no complaint challenge and I've never been able to do it. But it's just like, try not to complain for 1 week and see what happens.
I'm gonna rule that back a little bit.
Yeah.
Try not to complain for 1 day.
Yes.
And maybe that's today. Maybe that's tomorrow. And, it's okay if you mess up because guess what? Any chunk of time that you're not complaining, especially you who's sitting there like, I don't ever complain. I mean, I complain all the time, but please, I don't want to do this challenge. Don't make me.
Yeah.
Especially you. You can do it. Just don't complain for a day. Just see what it does. Prove us wrong. That's a big thing that I've found as I've talked with family and friends over the years when I'm like, hey, you have this problem. I can see, this, and this is why you're doing this. But if you just make this one little change, I think it will make a big difference. And I've noticed like I have to keep on them for like weeks and weeks and weeks, and then they or not, and then they come back 6 months or 6 weeks later with the same thing, and I'm like, hey, did you ever try that thing that I told you? And they're like, no. I'm like, just try it. Just prove me wrong. So prove me wrong. Like, literally, what do you have to lose besides a little bit of effort? And heck, maybe this could be the leaf that turns for you, where if you stop complaining, maybe that'll change how you view the world. So that's your challenge for today. Stop complaining for a day, a single day, and let us know what you think. Did it go bad? Did it go, amazingly? Did it go poorly?
Did you have to lock yourself into a closet so you wouldn't talk to anybody? Like, what did you do to make sure that this would happen?
And, it may seem ridiculous, but when something bad happens to you, think of something completely random that you can shift and say out loud, even if you're thinking the complaint, right? Like, oh, my knee. Oh, but breakfast was actually pretty good.
At least I've got one knee uninjured.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. My dad always said you can't hurt in two places. So you hit your knee and then you frog yourself in the arm.
Yeah,
and
right,
be like,
exactly.
Wow, I can punch really hard.
I don't even feel the knee anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So do that challenge. And guess what? If it completely sucks for you, I give you permission to complain after the fact.
Yes. Come back tomorrow and complain to us about how hard it was or wasn't. Yeah.
Yes. All right. So that's your challenge for today. With that, everyone have a wonderful day.